The evening sun hung low over the quiet suburban town of Pinebrook, painting the sky in soft shades of amber and gold. The streets were clean, calm, and lined with tall oak trees whose leaves whispered in the wind. It was the kind of town that liked to believe it had no problems, where people smiled at the grocery store, waved from their porches, and whispered behind closed doors when someone looked different. Jamal Rivers walked down Oak Ridge Avenue with his gym bag slung over his shoulder, sweat still cooling on his skin after basketball practice. His white sneakers scuffed the sidewalk as he moved, earbuds tucked in, humming to himself. He was 17, polite, thoughtful, the kind of kid teachers called a role model. His dream was to be an engineer one day, maybe design something that would make life better for people. He always walked home the same way, through streets where kids once crossed to the other side rather than pass him. It didn't bother him much anymore. His mom had taught him how to hold his head high, how not to let other people's small minds shrink his spirit. His mother, Monica Rivers, worked for the FBI. Everyone at school knew that. Some thought it was cool. Others avoided him because of it. But to Jamal, she wasn't Agent Rivers. She was just Mom, the woman who drank black coffee every morning and told him, "Never lose your calm. In this world, son, calm is your armor." He was halfway home when he passed the old gas station near Maple Street. Police cruiser sat parked by the pumps, its blue and white paint glinting under the fading sun. Inside were two officers, one eating chips, the other scrolling through his phone. Jamal didn't think much of it, just kept walking, his music low enough to hear the rustle of leaves. Still, something inside him tightened, that quiet instinct that all black boys learn too early, the one that tells them to stay aware. As he walked past, he caught one of the officers looking at him through the side mirror. The gaze wasn't just casual, it lingered, assessing. Jamal's steps didn't falter. He pulled out one earbud and glanced down at his phone, pretending to check a text. The cruiser didn't move, but he could feel their eyes following him. He took a slow breath, remembering what his mom always said when they talked about things like this. Some people will look at you and see a threat before they see a person. But your job, Jamal, isn't to carry their fear. It's to carry yourself with dignity. He whispered her words quietly to himself, like a prayer. When he reached the intersection, Mrs. Keating, an elderly neighbor, waved from her porch. "Evening, Jamal," she called, smiling warmly. He smiled back, grateful for the kindness. "Evening, ma'am. Have a good night." It was small moments like that which helped him breathe easier, even when the world outside still felt like it was waiting to test him. By the time he turned onto his street, the sun was almost gone, and a faint chill had crept into the air. He could see his house at the end of the block, warm light glowing from the kitchen window. His mom was probably cooking dinner, maybe listening to one of those old Motown songs she loved. He quickened his pace, a soft smile forming on his lips. Behind him, a car engine started. The familiar hum of the police cruiser rolled down the street, slow and deliberate. Jamal's heart skipped, but he didn't turn around. He reminded himself there was no reason to be afraid. Not tonight. He adjusted his bag strap, looked straight ahead, and whispered, "Stay calm." The cruiser followed for a few seconds, headlights stretching his shadow long against the pavement before it turned away at the next block. Jamal exhaled, unaware that this was the last peaceful walk home he'd take for a long time. Inside the house, Monica looked at the clock and smiled faintly. "He should be home any minute," she murmured, setting the table for two. The fork clinked softly against the plate, the kind of ordinary sound that means safety, warmth, routine. But outside, the quiet town of Pinebrook was about to show its other face, the one hidden behind all that politeness, the one that would soon test everything Monica had ever taught her son. The night had fallen over Pinebrook, quiet and still. Streetlights flickered one by one, casting pale circles of light over empty sidewalks. Jamal walked faster, his gym bag bouncing gently at his side. He was tired, hungry, and ready for a shower, but something inside him felt uneasy, a low hum of tension that came from nowhere and everywhere at once. He didn't notice at first that the same police cruiser from earlier was now creeping behind him again. Its headlights dimmed. When it drew closer, the air changed. Jamal heard the engine slow, then a sharp voice cut through the night. "Hey." "Stop right there," he froze, Slowly, he turned his head. Two officers stepped out. Mike Hanlon, tall and broad, his voice rough with authority, and Rick Duffy, younger, his hand resting a little too comfortably on his holster. Jamal blinked, confused. "Is something wrong, officer?" he asked, his voice steady but soft. "You fit the description," Hanlon said. "We got a report of a burglary not far from here. Young black male, about your height, dark hoodie." Jamal frowned. "Sir, I just came from basketball practice." "You can call the school." Hanlon cut him off. "Hands where I can see them." Jamal lifted his hands slowly. His heart thudded, but he remembered his mother's voice. Calm, clear, firm. "Don't argue. Don't make sudden moves. Stay respectful even when they aren't. Check his bag," Duffy muttered. Jamal swallowed. "That's my gym bag." "I've got—" "Quiet," Hanlon snapped. "You'll speak when we tell you." The officer grabbed the bag, unzipped it, and dumped its contents on the sidewalk. Sneakers, a water bottle, a towel, and his worn math notebook spilled out. A few sheets of paper fluttered into the gutter. Duffy smirked. "Doesn't look like stolen property to me." Hanlon ignored him, looking Jamal up and down. "Got ID?" "Yes, sir." Jamal reached slowly toward his pocket. "Hands up." Hanlon barked, pulling his flashlight. The beam hit Jamal's face, blinding him. I was just— my wallet's right here." His voice cracked slightly, panic bleeding through. Hanlon stepped closer. "Turn around. Hands behind your head." "Sir, I didn't do anything wrong. Don't argue." The shout echoed down the street, breaking the stillness of the night. A curtain moved in a nearby window. Someone was watching. Then another light flicked on across the street. Jamal's breath came short. He turned as ordered, hands trembling behind his head. The cold metal of the handcuffs snapped around his wrists, the sound sharp as glass. Duffy leaned close, his tone mocking. "You kids think you can walk around like you own the place. Maybe this'll teach you a lesson." Jamal's voice was barely a whisper. "A lesson for what?" Hanlon pushed him forward. "For running with the wrong crowd." "I didn't run from anyone," Jamal said, choking back the lump in his throat. "I was walking home." The officers said nothing. The sound of his sneakers scraping the pavement mixed with the static of their radios. Across the street, Mrs. Keating opened her door slightly, her hand over her mouth. She didn't step outside. She didn't say a word. "Please," Jamal tried again. "My mom's waiting for me." "You can call her—" "Yeah? What's her name?" Hanlon asked, a smirk tugging at his lips. "Monica Rivers," Hanlon chuckled. "Sure, we'll get right on that." He shoved Jamal toward the cruiser. Tears burned at the corners of Jamal's eyes, but he refused to let them fall. He'd promised himself he wouldn't cry, not in front of them. Not when they already thought he was something he wasn't. When they reached the car, he caught his reflection in the window, eyes wide, face pale, jaw tight. The boy staring back at him didn't look dangerous. He just looked tired. Hanlon opened the back door. "Get in." Jamal hesitated. "Sir, please. I didn't do anything." The officer's patience broke. "Don't make me repeat myself." Jamal climbed in silently. The door slammed shut behind him with a heavy, final thud. Through the glass, he saw the faces of onlookers. Curious, frightened, indifferent. Phones were raised, recording. For a moment, Jamal thought maybe someone would say something, but no one did. The world just watched. He lowered his head, staring at his hands cuffed together, his mind spinning. His mother's voice echoed again. "Stay calm, baby. Calm keeps you alive." He inhaled deeply, but the air felt heavier now. Full of something he couldn't name. Humiliation. Fear, disbelief. The cruiser began to move, its lights flashing blue against the houses. Jamal's heart sank as he whispered to himself, "Mom's gonna be so scared." But somewhere across town, Agent Monica Rivers had already glanced at the clock, frowning at the empty chair across from her dinner table. Something told her, something deep and sharp, that her son wasn't just late. Something was wrong. The walls of the interrogation room were a dull, lifeless gray. The hum of the fluorescent light above was constant, steady, cold, and unnervingly loud in the silence. Jamal sat on the hard metal chair, his wrists still cuffed, his eyes fixed on the blank table in front of him. He'd been there for almost 2 hours. No one had told him why. No one had called his mother. Every time he asked, an officer outside the door told him to sit tight. The word "sit tight" had started to sound like a threat. He shifted uncomfortably, his legs shaking beneath the table. His hoodie felt too tight now, his chest too heavy. He tried to remember the last time he'd taken a full breath. In his head, he could still hear the shouts from earlier, the mocking tone of the officer who said, "You people always have excuses." That sentence repeated itself like a drumbeat, sinking deeper into his chest with every echo. He looked at his reflection in the shiny table surface. Just a boy, tired, scared, and small in a place built to break people down. "Am I really that threatening?" he whispered to himself. The question hung in the air, unanswered. His mind drifted back to when he was little, sitting on the porch with his mom. He'd been 8 years old, and they'd been watching the sunset after a long day at the park. A man had crossed the street when he saw them walking his way. Jamal remembered asking her, why did he do that? Monica had smiled sadly and said, "Because fear is taught, baby. But so is courage. One day you'll learn to give people one and not carry the other." He'd nodded, not really understanding then. Now, sitting in that cold room, he finally did. The door creaked open, pulling him back to the present. Officer Hanlon stepped in, holding a clipboard. His expression was half smirk, half boredom. "Ready to tell me what you were doing out there tonight?" Hanlon asked, leaning against the wall. "I already did," Jamal said quietly. "I was walking home from practice." "Uh-huh." Hanlon flipped through the clipboard. "And you expect me to believe that? You kids always got a story." "I told the truth." Hanlon walked closer, tapping his pen against the metal table. "You know what your problem is? You think being polite's gonna save you. But you look exactly like the kind of guy we get calls about. Hood up, walking around at night, acting nervous." Jamal clenched his fists beneath the table, his knuckles white. "I wasn't nervous until you stopped me." Hanlon's jaw tightened. "Watch your tone, son." "I'm not your son," Jamal said softly. For a long moment, neither spoke. The air between them thickened, heavy with unspoken truths. Then Hanlon turned and walked out, muttering something under his breath about attitude. When the door shut again, Jamal's composure cracked. His eyes stung, his throat tightened, and all the fear he'd been holding back poured out in silence. He rested his head on his cuffed hands, letting the tears fall where no one could see. Outside the room, laughter echoed from the hallway. Officers chatting, sipping coffee, completely unaware that inside, a boy's faith in fairness was breaking piece by piece. He thought about his mother again, how she'd always told him that no matter what, someone would see the truth. "Justice doesn't always come fast," she used to say. "But it comes," he closed his eyes. "Please, Mom, I need you to find me." Across town, Monica Rivers sat in her car, tapping her fingers against the steering wheel. It had been over an hour since she'd called Jamal, straight to voicemail every time. She'd checked the school. Practice had ended hours ago. Her heart pounded faster now, not in panic, but in instinct, that trained intuition sharpened by years of field work. Something wasn't right. She opened her laptop on the passenger seat, connected to the FBI locator app, and entered her son's phone number. The signal blinked on screen. "Pine Brook Police Department." For a moment, she didn't breathe. Then she grabbed her keys and started the car. Back in the station, Jamal sat in silence, the ticking clock on the wall mocking him. Every second felt longer than the last. He looked down at his wrists, the red marks from the cuffs, the faint tremble in his fingers. He thought about all the lessons his mother had given him, all the ways she'd tried to protect him, and yet, none of them seemed strong enough to protect him from this. He whispered to himself, barely audible, "I did everything right." No one answered. The room was too quiet, too empty, and too full of a truth he didn't want to accept, that sometimes doing everything right still wasn't enough. But before despair could settle in completely, he heard it, a faint but firm voice echoing down the hallway. Calm yet sharp as glass. "I'm here for my son." He lifted his head slowly. He knew that voice. He'd know it anywhere. The air shifted. The sound of heels clicking against the tile grew louder. Then came the low murmur of officers whispering. Confusion, panic, recognition. Monica Rivers had arrived. And for the first time that night, Jamal allowed himself to breathe. The front doors of the Pine Brook Police Department swung open with a sharp creak that echoed down the hallway. Every officer in sight turned. Standing there was Monica Rivers, still in her plain work clothes, No badge on her chest yet, no gun on her belt. But her presence filled the room like thunder rolling in. She walked straight to the front desk. Her tone was even, but every word carried weight. My son Jamal Rivers, 17. He was brought in a little over an hour ago. I want to see him. The desk sergeant barely looked up. Ma'am, if he's in custody, you'll have to wait. He's under investigation. Monica's jaw tightened. Investigation? For what? That's confidential. You'll need to. Monica reached into her bag and calmly laid her FBI credentials on the desk. The gold letters gleamed under the harsh fluorescent light. The sergeant froze mid-sentence. I won't ask again, she said, her voice dropping lower, steadier. Where is my son? A pause filled the air. Conversations in the background went quiet. The officers who had arrested Jamal, Hanlon and Duffy, stepped into view at the end of the hall. Their faces drained of color. Hanlon cleared his throat. Agent Rivers, we didn't know that he had a mother? She interrupted sharply. Or that you needed one to remind you of procedure. Hanlon shifted uneasily. There was a report. He matched the description. We were just doing our job. Monica's eyes narrowed. Your job? Tell me, Officer Hanlon, what was that description? Hanlon hesitated. Young black male, hoodie, walking alone. So, a description that fits half the teenagers in this country, she said coldly. And what gave you probable cause to detain him? His skin tone? His confidence? Duffy opened his mouth to speak, but one look from her silenced him. She took a slow breath, deliberately calm. You will take me to my son now. The sergeant nodded quickly, fumbling for the keys. Of course, Agent Rivers. This way? As she followed him down the hallway, every step echoed with quiet fury. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Authority moved with her like a shadow. When they reached the holding room, Monica stopped at the door. Through the small window, she saw Jamal, her boy, sitting at the table, wrists cuffed, eyes red. The sight cracked something inside her. She pressed her hand to the glass for a moment before the officer unlocked the door. Thank you, she said tightly. You can leave us. The officer hesitated. Protocol says, I am the protocol, she said, and he stepped aside without another word. She entered the room quietly. The air was heavy. Jamal looked up, disbelief flashing across his face. Mom. His voice broke. She crossed the room in 2 steps and wrapped her arms around him. It's okay, baby. I'm here. For the first time that night, he let go. The tears came silently, shoulders trembling against her. Monica pulled back slightly, her hands on his cheeks. Did they hurt you? He shook his head, swallowing hard. No, but they treated me like I was nothing. Her gaze hardened. Then we'll remind them exactly who you are. She stood tall and turned toward the window, knowing the officers outside were watching. Her voice carried clearly through the thin walls. You made a mistake, and you're about to correct it. Hanlon and Duffy exchanged a look of panic. She reached into her pocket, producing her badge again, and held it up so they could see it clearly. You detained a federal agent's son without cause, without counsel, and without even a phone call. I suggest you start thinking about the consequences. Jamal watched her, awe replacing his fear. He'd always known his mother was strong, but seeing her like this, calm, composed, unshakable, was something else. Hanlon's voice came through the intercom, nervous now. We'll process his release immediately. Monica didn't even look up. You'll do more than that. You'll write a full report and every word of it will go through me. Understand? Silence. Then a quiet, yes, ma'am. She turned back to Jamal and gently removed the cuffs from his wrists herself. The marks were faint but visible. She rubbed his skin softly. They don't get to define you, she said. Not tonight. Not ever. He nodded, his eyes steady now. I just wanted to go home. I know, she whispered. And we will. But first, they're going to learn that power doesn't give you permission to forget humanity. As they walked out together, the station that had felt so intimidating only hours ago now seemed smaller. Its authority, exposed as fragile when faced with real courage. Every officer who had looked at Jamal with suspicion now looked away in shame. Monica didn't need to gloat. The truth was loud enough without words. She placed a hand on her son's back as they stepped outside into the cool night air. "Come on," she said softly. "Let's go home." The wind was gentle now, the same one that had followed Jamal earlier. But this time it carried something different. Not fear, but quiet strength. The next morning, the air inside the Pine Brook Police Department felt thick with unease. Word had spread fast. The boy they'd arrested wasn't just anyone. His mother was an FBI agent, and she wasn't the kind of woman who let things slide quietly. Officers whispered to each other in the hallway, pretending to look busy whenever Monica passed. But she wasn't there for gossip or grudges. She was there for justice. Monica and Jamal sat across from the police chief in his office, the tension between them almost visible. The chief, a man in his 50s with gray hair and tired eyes, tried to maintain his composure. Papers lay neatly arranged on his desk, though his fingers tapped nervously against them. "Agent Rivers," he began, his tone overly formal, "I want to apologize for last night. It appears there was some confusion. Monica's voice was calm but firm. "You call an unlawful detainment, racial profiling, and the humiliation of a minor confusion?" The chief sighed, leaning back in his chair. "My officers were responding to a report. They had no way of knowing," Monica cut in sharply. "They didn't need to know who I am. They only needed to know the law, which for the record they violated." Jamal sat silently beside her, hands folded, staring at the floor. He'd barely slept. The images from last night kept replaying. The flashing lights, the cold cuffs, the laughter outside the interrogation room. He felt like a shadow of himself, still trying to make sense of what had happened. The chief cleared his throat, trying to shift the conversation. "If it helps, the officers involved have been placed on temporary leave while we review the situation." "That's not enough," Monica said, her tone unwavering. "You'll release the footage from the cruiser and the station cameras. You'll issue a public statement acknowledging the misconduct, and you'll review your department's bias training, if it even exists." The chief's lips pressed together. "You're asking a lot, Agent Rivers." "I'm not asking," she replied. "I'm telling you what accountability looks like." The room fell silent for a long moment. Jamal looked up, watching the quiet authority in his mother's posture. She wasn't angry, not the way people got when they lost control. Her anger was measured, deliberate, and powerful. It made the chief look smaller in his own office. When Monica finished speaking, she turned to Jamal. "You have something you'd like to say, don't you?" Jamal hesitated, his throat dry. Then he nodded. "I just want to understand," he said softly. "What did I do wrong? Was it walking home with a hoodie on? Was it being polite? Or was it just existing?" The chief blinked, caught off guard. Jamal's words were calm, but there was something sharp in them, a truth that left no room for excuses. Hanlon and Duffy, the two officers who had arrested him, were standing near the door. They shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact. Jamal looked at them directly now, not with hate but with quiet strength. "You made me feel like I was less than human. You looked at me and saw a threat when all I was doing was going home." His voice trembled slightly. "You talk about protecting people, but who protects us from you?" The words hung heavy in the room. Even Monica's usual composure softened for a moment as she looked at her son, pride and pain mixing in her expression. The chief finally spoke, his voice quieter. "You're right," he admitted. "We failed you, Jamal. We failed to see you for who you are." Monica nodded once. "Acknowledgement is a start," she said. "But change is what matters." She stood, placing her badge on the table. "You can cover your mistakes with paperwork, or you can start fixing the system that allows this to happen. Your choice." Jamal rose beside her, his shoulders squared, his eyes calm but resolute. The fear from the night before was gone, replaced by something steadier, something powerful. He wasn't just her son anymore. He was a young man standing in his truth. As they walked toward the door, the chief stood as if to stop them. "Agent Rivers, Jamal," he began, but his words faded into silence. There was nothing left to say. Outside, the morning sun was bright and clean. The air smelled of rain and redemption. Jamal took a deep breath, feeling the warmth on his skin, the simple freedom of standing outside those walls again. He looked at his mother. "You didn't yell. You didn't even threaten them," he said quietly. "How do you stay so calm?" She smiled faintly. "Because calm isn't weakness, baby. It's control. When they lose theirs, that's when the truth shows. Jamal nodded slowly, understanding for the first time what she meant all those years she told him to stay calm. It wasn't just about surviving. It was about refusing to let hate decide who you are. They walked to the car together. The police station behind them felt smaller now, less powerful, like something that could no longer scare them. Jamal glanced back one last time. The reflection of the badge in his mother's hand gleamed in the sunlight, a reminder that real power didn't come from authority. It came from integrity. As they drove away, Pine Brook's quiet streets looked different. The same oak trees, the same houses, the same familiar roads, but somehow they felt changed, because last night a boy had been treated like a suspect. But today he stood as a symbol, not of anger but of strength, of truth, and of the quiet resilience that no handcuffs could ever hold down. The story spread faster than anyone expected. By noon the next day, the video of Jamal's arrest, recorded by a bystander, was circulating on social media. Millions watched in disbelief as a calm, respectful teenager was handcuffed and humiliated for simply walking home. Hashtags flooded timelines. News vans lined the quiet streets of Pine Brook, and for the first time, the town that prided itself on being peaceful was forced to look at what peace had really meant. Silence. Monica sat at the kitchen table, her laptop open, watching the coverage with a blank expression. The faces on the screen debated, analyzed, and argued, but none of them knew what it felt like to sit in a police station waiting to see if your child would make it home. Jamal stood by the window, staring out at the small crowd gathering near their driveway. Reporters, neighbors, and strangers holding signs that said "Justice for Jamal." He wasn't sure how to feel. Part of him was grateful that people cared. Another part felt exposed, like his pain had become a public event. "Mom," he said quietly, "I didn't want this." Monica looked up. "I know." She closed the laptop gently. "But sometimes, son, we don't choose to be the story. The story chooses us." He turned toward her, his brow furrowed. "Do you think they'll actually change anything?" She studied him for a moment, then smiled faintly. "Change doesn't happen in headlines. It happens when people stop pretending not to see." "You made them see." Her phone buzzed, a call from the police chief. She let it ring, not out of spite, but because some apologies didn't need to be heard. They needed to be earned. Later that week, a town meeting was held at the Pine Brook Community Center. It was packed. Every seat filled, every wall lined with people who wanted to witness what justice might look like. Jamal sat in the front row beside his mother, trying to steady his heartbeat as the mayor took the stage. "We gather tonight," the mayor began, "to address an incident that has shaken our town and forced us to confront truths we've ignored for too long." He turned to Jamal. "Young man, your composure and courage have reminded us what accountability really means." There was applause, hesitant at first, then stronger. Jamal didn't stand or smile. He just nodded respectfully. He wasn't here for recognition. He was here for understanding. Monica spoke next. Her voice carried through the hall like a sermon. Calm, deliberate, unflinching. "My son did everything right," she said. "He was polite, compliant, and respectful. And still, he was treated as guilty before being seen as human. This isn't just about him. It's about every young person who's learned to survive by shrinking themselves to make others comfortable. That's not peace. That's fear dressed as order." The room fell silent. Even those who had doubted them now listened. A woman in the back stood up, Mrs. Keating, their neighbor. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "I saw it happen. I wanted to say something, but I didn't. I was afraid." "I'm sorry." Monica turned to her and nodded gently. "Thank you for saying that. The first step isn't being perfect. It's being honest." Jamal glanced around the room, noticing how people were shifting. Uncomfortable, reflective, changed. Maybe just a little. But change had to start somewhere. In the weeks that followed, the Pine Brook Police Department announced new bias training programs, public oversight, and a community youth initiative, one inspired by Jamal's story. Some people called it performative. Others said it was overdue. But to Jamal, it didn't matter what they called it. What mattered was that the silence had been broken. One afternoon, Jamal sat at his desk, typing on his laptop. His essay was nearly finished. the one his teacher had encouraged him to write for a national youth essay contest. The title read, "What It Means to Stay Calm When the World Isn't." He paused before writing the final lines. Calm doesn't mean giving up. It means refusing to let hate rewrite who you are. Because dignity, once claimed, can never be taken again. He leaned back, reading it over. For the first time since that night, he smiled. Outside, the sun dipped low in the sky, casting golden light across their yard. Monica stepped onto the porch, calling out to him. "Jamal, come take a walk with me." They strolled down the same street where everything had begun. The oak trees swayed gently overhead, their shadows stretching long across the pavement. The same gas station still stood at the corner, but this time there was no police cruiser waiting. As they walked, Monica slipped her hand into his. "You know," she said softly, "they tried to make you small that night." Jamal looked at her, his eyes reflecting the sunset. "Yeah, but I guess I stood taller than they expected." She smiled, pride shining through her calm. "You did, baby. You really did." They continued down the road, side by side, the world quiet around them. Not the kind of quiet born of fear, but the kind that follows truth. And though the wounds of that night would take time to fade, something powerful had taken root. Not anger, but awareness. Not revenge, but respect. Because real justice isn't only in punishment. It's in the courage to speak, the strength to endure, and the hope that even in the darkest moments, light can still find its way home.